She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For their morning, the day is dawning. Forgot a crow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking.
All right, good evening and welcome to Straight Up. Well, not necessarily straight up, but it's a Anansi Web Education. But I'm glad I got your attention there. There was something on this video that caught my attention, President Granger. She got up early in the morning doing her work and so forth, and by her side, she has her grandson, right? Because on the quarantine, we usually say this, that your grandmothers get you, pick you up, and carry you all over. Those are the guys who grew up with a grandmother. And because of that sort of different sort of discipline, whenever you detect something like that from somebody, say, hey, you grew up with your grandmother. You grew up with your grandmother. Good night, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for that introduction. You're quite right. It's a cultural experience to know and grow up with your grandparents because they transmit values, and these, there's a saying, in education, the best time to educate a child is 100 years ago, and this reflects what you're saying, that the best time to educate those children from the grandparents, not necessarily from the mothers and fathers, but from the grandparents and, of course, the great-grandparents. That's where you get your cultural values from. That's where you understand what life is all about. So you're quite right that, people who know and grew up with their grandparents tend to share that bond of continuity, from one generation to the next, and sometimes from one century to the next. So it's good that you should show this to introduce this important education program.
Absolutely. And for me, I've been fortunate enough to spend time with all of my grandparents, my maternal and my paternal grandparents. My paternal grandfather was Dutch, a Dutchman from Suriname, Julius Paul Wenschap. Dutch guy, came to Guyana, hardly spoke English. Then he left and he returned. And I spent a lot of time with him. He spoke Dutch, run me around the house, things, and I couldn't understand exactly what he was saying. Many years later, I asked some Dutch relatives in Suriname, I said, "Ma, what vroeg means?" He says, "You little rascal."
Okay.
But I spent some time.
He was right about that.
Oops. Yep. That's anyway, guys. Good night. We give you some time to share the link. So that was my experience with my paternal grandfather. Then my paternal grandmother, originally from Kildonan village, the Patterson, came from the Campbell, then Patterson, right at Kildonan village. Then my maternal grandfather, Murray from Linden. And my maternal grandmother also, I've spent lots and lots of time with them. So I'm fortunate to have spent time with all of my grandparents. My maternal grandmother is still alive, still strong. But good night to all of you grandparents out there. Grandparents is not what it used to be like when I was growing up. Grandparents, people in the 30s, and say, "It's a grandmother, in the 40s." Long ago, grandparents were different. But good night to all of you, wherever you are, whether you're grandparents, you're a parent, whatever you are, student. Good night and welcome to Anansi Web Education. All right, so today's topic is back into the elections, and we're dealing with the Elections Commission reported that 464,565 persons appeared to have voted in the general and regional elections on the 2nd of March 2020 to elect 65 members of the National Assembly. The proportional representation system under which elections were held was introduced 60 years ago in 1964. Questions have arisen, however, about how effectively MPs represent their constituencies in the National Assembly. And this is very important tonight. And again, I repeat, about questions have arisen, however, about how effectively MPs, members of parliament, represent their constituencies in the National Assembly. As you share the link, and if you just joined us, this is exactly what we will be discussing this evening. The first, of course, this program introduced of constituency, the importance, sorry, of constituencies for the democratic representation of the people in the National Assembly. So tonight's program aims at answering the following questions. Question number one, President Granger. Why was the proportional representation system introduced in 1964?
The answer is easy, I suppose, from one point of view. This is because the previous system, the first past the post system, in the context of Guyanese politics, was unfair. And in 1957 and 1961, the PPP was able to win with a minority of the votes. They got about 42% or 43% of the vote, whereas the opposition was winning, 57% of the vote. And the policies the PPP was introducing in those early 60s were harmful to the bulk of the population. And there was a widespread demand that the system be changed. And this came to a head in 1964 when the British government decided to change the system so that the people would be more fairly represented. The first past the post system was unbalanced. And I think there was a legitimate demand, and I support the demand for proportional representation. And this is a system we've had for 60 years, that if you get 55% of the vote, you get 55% of the seats. If you get 48% of the votes, you get 48% of the seats. It's commonsensical. But some changes have been made to PR system, which eroded the relationship between the candidates and the constituencies. But I believe the system is essentially fair and essentially balanced, as I explained on previous occasions. If you have a constituency of only 100 persons, and there are 5 candidates who are competing on the first past the post system, if 4 of those candidates get 18 votes each, that's 72, and the candidate with 28 votes would win and represent the entire constituency. Well, that is unfair. And what happens now is that if a candidate wins 28% of the vote, he gets 28% of the seats. And that is the difference between the two systems. For Guyana, maybe other people might think differently. For Guyana, it's a fair system because it gives proportional representation to the people of this country. However, in so doing, I think we throw out the baby with the bathwater, and the constituency system by which every candidate should represent a constituency was diminished or lost. But it was introduced with good reason in 1964. And when people speak of the disturbances, the bombing of the Son Chapman and the massacres that took place, the massacres of the Abraham family and massacres over the countryside during the PPP reign of terror. People were bringing weapons in this country. People were, sending people to foreign countries to train as saboteurs. And people waged a campaign. Over 200 persons were killed to prevent the introduction of the PR system. PPP wanted to retain the unbalanced first past the post system, in which they could manipulate the constituency boundaries and always keep winning and keep the majority of people in opposition. But it couldn't work. And PR system prevented the abuses of the PPP, but now it has started to age and it has developed problems of its own. And I think we need to examine how the system could be made to provide better representation of people. Politics is all about people. It's all about making sure that the issues affecting people, the quality of life, the way they make the living, are properly attended to by the government. And sometimes I think people use the political system to remove the people and let's deal with other considerations, like making money and, holding on to power and dominating the rest of the country without considering what the mass of the people actually want and actually deserve. So we need to bring the system back to the original purpose of the proportional representation, to make sure that their interests are paramount, to make sure that their needs are considered. Wherever they are, whether they're in Carasabai or Coriverton, we must make sure that we get our children in school, make sure that people are treated equally, make sure that they're empowered, make sure that they have employment, make sure the environment is protected. All these things are important, and these are issues which the political system must be concerned with, not just with who winner takes all and who gets this ministry or who gets into office or who gets this appointment. So the political system must be returned to the people, and the people must be encouraged to educate themselves so that they select MPs who represent their interests. And I think, unfortunately, there has been some decay in the bond that should exist between the MPs and their constituencies. Some MPs cannot identify their constituencies. Some parties cannot identify their constituencies. So how can you speak about people who you don't know? How can you go to the parliament and represent interests which you're unaware of? You see, it's a travesty, and in some instances, worse than a travesty. When you have somebody, with 244 votes, actually him becoming a member of parliament or probably becoming, deputy speaker, who does such a person represent? Is this the wave of the future? Is this what we're going to see in 2025? That somebody with 244 votes could actually occupy a seat which needs to be won by 7,000 votes. That is what it costs to get one MP elected. Around 7,000, not exactly 7,000, but thereabouts. But under the aberration, under the travesty, under the miscarriage that we are seeing now, people with such small amounts, in fact, groups of parties can't even reach the threshold of 7,000 votes, which you should need to gain a seat in the National Assembly. So we need to take corrective action to prevent these abuses from corrupting the entire system.
Thank you so much. I like the part where members of parliament must identify with a constituency to go into parliament to represent their constituency. And they should be doing that, but how things going, people just are more concerned. Some people are more concerned about titles and being MPs and so forth, but the representation isn't there. It ought to change. This takes us to the second question, and it's important, just like the first. Who selects candidates to compete in general and regional elections? Who really does the selection process?
Well, I very well could ask, who should select the candidates. The people should select the candidates, but right now I think the parties have come to control the system by which the candidates come from parties. But even within the parties, the people in those constituencies should select the candidates. They should meet among themselves and say, okay, we are from Central Quarantine or we're from South Rupununi, and we have confidence in such and such a person to represent us. He knows about the droughts, he knows about the floods, he knows about the transportation system, he knows about the education system. That is how it should happen. And I feel that political leaders should insist that the candidates come from among them and speak for them and about issues that affect them. Right now, I cannot answer your question accurately because I don't know how some of those candidates come to be selected. Um, if they don't come from the people, who do they represent? Uh, the parties are not as important in the political system as the people. The parties may have concerns, the parties may want to get into office, but the people have day-to-day concerns. The people want food, the people want jobs, the people want to be treated, as equal. The people want safety on the streets. And if the party spoke to the people, that is what the people would say. People would say things that concern them on a day-to-day basis. People, of course, different parts of the country, people in the hinterland may speak about border security. They may speak about the need for police, more police patrols, more military patrols. But the political party in office may say, "Oh, we need to put the police and the soldiers to clean up Mandela Avenue or to do some man on a mission." You see, that is where you have a disconnect between the party and governmental system and what the people want. You go and ask the people in Barmita or Kaikan what they need, and they're not going to tell you about, they want people in blue polo shirts cleaning up the medians and the highways. They're going to say, we want better patrols. We want patrols in the mining areas. We want patrols in the logging camps to prevent trafficking and to prevent disease and to prevent, environmental damage. But we have a system that doesn't actually accurately represent the interests of those people. And that is why we have problems in the country, because the political system is geared to deal with what people in the party apparatus are concerned about, not what people need to improve the quality of their life. That is the problem. There's a disconnect between the constituents, which are made up of human beings in a particular geographical area, and the candidates who are looking for a little walk.
Typical blockout, and that's why the people are complaining about the blackout technical failure there, and that is why we just got to probably, I don't know. So yes, guys, I hope you guys are not experiencing this sort of blackout the folks are in Georgetown currently experiencing. But let's get to our third question, and thank you so much for that explanation, President Granger. Our next question is, what factors affect constituency representation in the National Assembly?
Well, I would say that to start with, many, particularly in the smaller and minor parties, many candidates do not share a common ideological or intellectual position with the people they represent. And they just want to promote themselves to become elected. And as a result of that, they don't sit down with their constituents to deal with the issues. And when you speak to ordinary folk, they will tell you ordinary problems. They want the children to go to school, they want to be safe, they want the youngsters to get jobs. These are important issues for ordinary people, but sometimes you hear constituents, you hear the candidates speaking, and you wonder which planet they're on. So that is one problem, that they don't have common positions. The other problem is that when they go to parliament, they seem to be in a different world. They want duty-free this, they want to meet ministers and make deals, and they don't hold the executive branch accountable. So there's some disconnect that, once they get elected, then they sort of look after their own careers. They want to qualify, they want the children to get certain benefits. The problem is that many candidates are not actually selected by the people. They're selected by senior members of the party. So they are more responsive to the party leaders than to the people. It sounds like a paradox, but they just go there and repeat whatever line is taken by the party leaders. And this could be problematic because they don't speak as individuals or as representative of the constituency. They have to toe the party line. No, it's all well and good to represent your own particular party. But within that party, there must be some democracy, must be some discussion. When, for example, a simple matter like social cohesion could become, you can have the leader of the opposition actually holding up a plaque saying, social cohesion of power. So what is he actually telling the public? And why is the whole party accept that social cohesion is possible? Social cohesion is good. Social division is dangerous. So here you have a situation in which there is a disconnect. And I think when people feel that their presence in parliament is not derived from the confidence or the support of their constituency, then they don't have a will of their own. They just robots doing what they're told to do. And then of course the problem is aggravated in the smaller minor parties. In my view, if a constituency or if a candidate could be elected only on the basis of getting 7,000 votes, it is an abomination, it's an outrage for a person with 200 and 300 votes to pretend to represent anybody. They don't represent anybody. So these are some of the problems that we need to confront in answer to your question. And the constituency representation is affected by the nature of party politics, which tend not to support democratic ideas. In the sense, for example, look at the People's Progressive Party. When you look at the persons who end up in the Central Committee, or even in other parties, when people are only elected on a slate, many of the ordinary party members don't know these people. They've never worked among them. And they just see the slate. They go to Congress. Of course, Congress is democratic enough. But they're just told that, you vote for these 10 people. Who are they? What they believe in? What they're capable of? Many people don't know. So the whole system needs to be democratized. That is, the issues affecting ordinary folk on a continuing basis, everyday basis. The issues of education, empowerment, employment, and so on, have to be given priority in terms of defining the party's ideology. Some parties, unfortunately, don't even have membership rolls. They don't really have elections. They don't have annual conventions or quarterly meetings. You don't know who's on the council, who's on the central committee. You just see these people at the press conference, and they go on year after year, and when you question them, they say you're autocratic or dictatorial. But you ask people, where is your membership roll? How many members do you have? Why do you think you deserve a seat? So these are very important issues which need to be solved, not only in the what is called the body politic, but within parties, that there must be democracy within parties. Parties must hold meetings with their constituents. They must hold, if they have central committees or general councils, they must hold these consultations regularly. Otherwise, the system is farcical. So these factors, if there's no representation inside the party, there can not be a basis for representation outside the party. in terms of the whole country. So you see whole areas of government policy being ignored. The whole areas of the way the country is governed being ignored because there is no basis for consulting the people who live in those areas. So you get a lot of top-down solutions. That's why things don't work. You know, you decide on a coca must go here, and when people say we don't need a coca here, this is what we need, or a road must be done. So if you spoke to the people, you speak to the people in Region 8 or Region 9. Every year, for example, in Region 8, there's something called a safari. To go from the east to the west in Region 9, you have to get in an ATV or go on a safari. There's no road. Similarly, in Region 9, if you want to travel from Anai to Ishalton, there's no proper highway. You know, when there's a flood or when there's any major environmental issue, you know, transportation is hampered. But we're seeing all the roads going in areas where, you know, which are likely to be affected by the elections next year. But what happens to the people in the hinterland? No roads, no proper electricity, no proper water supply. Earlier in 2024, there was a situation in which thousands of kilos of cassava had to be taken to Rupununi. Rupununi should be selling cassava to the coast. And the coast now selling cassava to the Rupununi. And then we talk about food security. So something is wrong, not in the political representation, but in the way the whole country is being governed.
All right, thank you so much. We just dealt with what factors affect constituency representation in the National Assembly. And as we now move to our final question for today, which is the final question for today, which is, how effectively do MPs represent their constituencies in the National Assembly?
In a way, I would say that question was answered because the representation, if there are no constituencies, for example, in the case of the joinders, the small and medium parties, I don't know whether they have constituencies. I don't know who they represent. I don't know which part of the country they're from. I don't know if you ask any of them, where is your constituency and what are the issues concerning your constituency. I don't know if you can get an answer that you could work with. So they speak for themselves. You know, maybe they meet at some club, and it is interesting to examine where these parties were launched. Many of them were launched in some upscale hotel in Georgetown. It means that they may very well have very little contact with the people in rural areas, and most of the people in Guyana live in rural and hinterland areas. They don't live in Georgetown. And it is significant that many of these parties were actually launched in hotels among a select few persons. They weren't launched in popular areas in the hinterland and rural Guyana. So who do they represent, and how do they come up with their so-called manifestos? I don't know if some of them have manifestos. If some of them go before the public and say, these are the things that we believe in, and these are the things we work for. Because after the elections, okay, let us say they come together and they form this joiner, or they get into parliament if they're a bigger party. Do they hold the government to account on specific issues, or do they simply follow the dictates of the general secretary and hold up a placard and say we're against this or we're for that? So what do the people, did they actually consult the people and say, do you think social cohesion is a farce? Do you think that the Green State Development Strategy is a farce? You know, do you think that, the education system is farcical? Do you think the Ghanaian Youth Corps is a farce? I mean, who they do consult before they come to these decisions? You know, people belong to the national service. They go and train young people. It is supported widely. And then you get in the government, you just simply abolish it. Who did you consult? Did you consult the youth? Did you ask the young people, is this national service a waste of time? Is this youth corps a waste of time? You know, is the use of school buses a waste of time? So we see these policies which do not, they just represent the imagination of one or two people. They do not represent the constituencies. They do not represent the issues of the people. So we have in Guyana a political system which might represent a few interests, but certainly not the general welfare of the people. And that's why it is lopsided. Next year, 2025, we go to the polls again, and we will see candidates approaching the general public, calling for their votes. But what we need to see is the public asking themselves, what do you believe in and what will you do for me when you go to the RDC or to the National Assembly? And this is what will change our political system, when the people organize themselves and stop, you know, simply waving the flag and supporting organizations which continuously let them down. We saw in 2020, within weeks of the election results being declared, some parties just went out of existence. And we see within weeks of the elections, some so-called MPs accepting jobs with the government they chose to oppose. So, I mean, it is easy to see that the system isn't working for the people. I don't know if it could be said it's working to enrich a few or maybe to empower a few, but I think gradually the people of this country, by and large, are being left behind by the political parties.
Thank you so much, dear President Granger. Answering that final question, how effectively do MPs represent their constituencies in the National Assembly?
Not effectively.
Not effectively. Thank you so much. And so today we dealt with, on Anansi Web Education, we discussed the topic, the importance of constituencies for the democratic representation of the people in the National Assembly. And that is not being done effectively. President Granger, thank you so much for your time. And to all of our listeners, we appreciate your time as well. And we will return right here next week, same place, same time, on Anansi Web Education via 107.1 FM. President Granger, again, thank you so much. And please convey our regards to Mistress Granger, our former First Lady. Thank you, sir.
Thank you and good night.
Yeah. Good night, everyone. And see you again next week. Stay safe. God bless.
Katakro, Dagaba, Donkey Bray, Harsane, even Dokapwa. Katakro, Dagaba, Donkey Bray, Harsane, even Dokapwa. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. Oh, they are back down, you know.